Anyway, welcome to this webinar on Achieve Total Success. Unfortunately, I'm not being very successful with the computer today, so hopefully it won't crash on me again. For those of you that don't know me, I'll just do a brief introduction here in terms of why I'm qualified to teach a class on success. And as I said in the email that you received to sign up for the program, I've been there and done it. I started at the bottom a long time ago and worked my way through school, got my bachelor's in electrical engineering and design radio equipment for 15 years. And then during the last couple of years there, I went back to school and got a PhD in psychology while I was still working full time. And I've been doing seminars now for about 30 years. And been around the world a couple of times, taught in 30 countries, and quite a few people have learned project management from me. And my current situation is that I have a certificate program at NC State University, which I know a number of you have been through. And most of you have signed up because you received a mailing from NC State. And I should tell you that we do this on a totally non-paid basis. This is just something that we do as a service to the people that go through our programs. And so that's part of the deal. And one of the reasons that I'm doing this program on success is because I had to find my own way when I was younger, and there's the easy way and the hard way, and finding your own way is the hard way. And so as part of what I'm trying to do in a semi-retired state now is to give back as much as I possibly can to other people, and so that's the reason for the Success Program. For those of you that are interested in getting PDUs for this program, let me just make a comment about why this is relevant to project managers in the first place. My personal view is that you aren't likely to be very successful as a project manager unless you also know some of the principles of success. And so it just struck me that this would be a good way to help you with that part, and also to help people learn about success principles. So that's the background, and let me just move on into the course material here. Incidentally, there was a note on the reminder about how to download the handouts. If you have not done that, you can do it after the program is over and have copies of all these slides, so they are available to you. So you want to be a total success, and the first step in that process is to take total responsibility for your own life. Nobody else is going to do that for you. And it's fairly fashionable these days for folks to blame circumstances and other people for their failures or putting obstacles in their way. And sometimes it's true. Some of those things do happen, and people do get in our way, and situations get in our way. But stuff does happen, and what matters is how you respond to it. So this little equation, if you want to call it that, sort of explains how to look at this. There's an event, in which case, or in this case, we're talking about an unfortunate event, something that has caused you a problem. And your response to that event equals the eventual outcome, equals what happens to you over time. It turns out that successful people tend to have an internal locus of control. For those of you that may not be familiar with that term, it means that they see themselves as having control over their lives and their destinies and that sort of thing, in spite of the fact that stuff happens. Whereas unsuccessful people tend to have an external locus of control. They feel like they don't have control. They're victims of the world's circumstances and that sort of thing. And oftentimes that comes from some very bad experiences that they had when they were growing up. And I certainly can understand it. I had my share of those when I was a kid. And the Eagles have a song that I always like that sort of sums it up, and yet it sounds a little bit harsh too, but the song says, "Get over it." And that's about all we can do. As one statement goes, if life gives you lemons, make lemonade. And try to pull out some positive outcome from that unfortunate situation. So if you will keep that in mind, that will be one of the first things that will go a long way to help you be more successful. Now, before I go any further, I'd like to just have you take a moment to think about what success actually means to you. How do you define success? What is that? And what does it mean in terms of where you are in your life at the moment and where you want to go? So I'm going to just be quiet here for just a half a minute or so. And I'd like to suggest that you kind of write down how you define success. I'd like for you to be active here as opposed to just sitting there like a bump on a log. So I'll be quiet for a minute and let you think. Okay, presumably some of you have had time to think about that. Now, one of the illustrations that I found here when I was putting this program together is the one you see on the slide. And as you can see, both these individuals have no feet, and the little girl has no hands, and neither of them has given up, and neither should we. So one of the things that we find is that in spite of the obstacles, we have to be persistent in trying to move forward. So that's a hard lesson, but it's one that's, again, worth learning. Now, let's come back to the definition of success. We Americans in particular tend to define success as status and money, and they tend to go hand in hand. I was an engineer for a long time, and one of the things that most engineers will tell you is that they don't tend to have a lot of status, and although they may make a reasonable salary, they don't feel like they are highly regarded in a lot of organizations. And so one of the things that happens to them is that they want to be managers because that gives them status and also more money at the same time. Unfortunately, one of the things that is a byproduct of that is that they wind up being very unhappy managers because they don't like managing all that much, and they aren't doing what they were trained to do or educated to do, which was their engineering profession. And so they wind up being more highly paid, higher status, unhappy individuals. And to me, that's not a very successful thing. Studies have found that a very large percentage of executives hate their jobs. As much as 85% of them dislike their jobs to some degree. Now again, they're paid well, and many of them have golden parachutes, so that if things don't work out, they still land on their feet, money-wise at least. But I don't think that's very successful. I know some people that are fairly wealthy, but they are in bad health or physical condition. That's not success. Others are in good jobs, but they're in very bad relationships. And it's kind of hard to feel successful when that's the case. Whatever happened to defining success as having what you need, but being happy at the same time? And so I think there's some thinking that some of us need to do instead of just getting into the rat race and chasing after the dollars and the status. Lily Tomlinson once quipped that the problem with the rat race was that even if you won the rat race, you were still a rat. And so I don't think we want to be high-paid, high-status rats either. So here's the way I like to think about it. There are 4 dimensions and a thing called finances that we have to balance in order to be truly successful. Now, I don't think anybody ever completely achieves balance in these areas, so it has to be sort of relative balance. And in a way, it's balance on the average over time, because at any given time you might get really stressed out at work, and you're in a high stress situation. Your mind is bothered by that. It may even affect your body and your relationships. And so you go through that phase, and then things get better, and you're back on your feet again. So at any given time, you may find that one of these is out of balance, or even a couple of them may be out of balance. But you try to keep them in balance over time. One of the things that Steve Covey said in his book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, is that we often forget to sharpen the saw, which is to pay attention to the mind and the spirit. We get so involved in our work, trying to make that dollar, trying to provide for our families and take care of our children and all that sort of thing, that the saw gets dull, to use his metaphor, and pretty soon you find that you're not making very much progress in cutting wood. And sharpening the saw means that you have to step away from the work occasionally, and you have to do something strictly for your own renewal. Spiritual things, psychological things, listening to good music, going out in the nature. For some of you, that might be the way that you do it. But in any case, you owe it to yourself to make sure that these things don't get so out of balance that you pay a big penalty for it. Because one of the things that Bruce Lipton has shown is that if you're under stress for a great deal of time, it will have a toxic effect on your body. Your brain actually creates toxic chemicals that attach to cell walls throughout your body, and if they stay attached to the cell wall very long, the cell dies, and it has a physical effect on you. So the old thing about stress will kill you is really true. The other thing I want to point out to you is that if you happen to be in a toxic relationship, either in a marriage or a bad relationship with family or friends or something like that, you need to try to get out of those as soon as possible too, because you can't have balance and you can't be fully engaged in successful pursuits if those things are going on for you. So like a friend of mine used to say, the company may own your job, but you should own your career. And another way to say that is that, as we said earlier, you have to take responsibility for seeing to it that your life proceeds as you want it to. All right, step number 2. You've taken responsibility for yourself. Now, where are you going? And again, Steve Covey said, highly effective people begin with the end in mind. They have a goal. And Viktor Frankl, who survived Auschwitz prison camp during World War II, said that people need meaning in their lives, and one of the things that gives us meaning is to have goals that we pursue. It seems that human beings have a difficult time living without goals, and this is one of the things that happens to people who retire sometimes. They have lived all their lives in a job which defined to some degree who they were, and they retire and they're looking forward to just vegetating. Unfortunately, vegetating will kill human beings. They need to be active, they need to be engaged, they need to be looking forward to something. And so you need a definite goal. Now, you certainly should have some financial goals, but you also need goals in terms of learning and vacationing and mind, body, spirit, the whole thing that we talked about a moment ago. And the important thing about these goals is that they must be very specific. A good example of this is shown by the illustration here. If you're shooting at a target, you don't just try to hit the target anywhere. You want to try to hit the bullseye. And so your goal needs to be specific, not just, I want to make a lot of money. That's not good enough. I'd like to have a net worth of $300,000 by the end of 2013, or I'd like my net worth to be $1 million by the end of 2013. Whatever is a reasonable target for you, it needs to be that specific. The other thing that's important is that goals need to be positive. If you have seen the video The Secret, or if you've listened to any of the Abraham material that the Hickses do, Esther Hicks and her husband, one of the things that she talks about is don't set negative goals for yourself. So, for example, I want to lose weight is a negative goal. It's a negative goal. And goal achievement is accomplished by processes that are outside our awareness to some degree. And that means that the subconscious is involved. The subconscious does not process negatives. Okay, so if you are dwelling on negatives, I don't want to be fat, then what the subconscious is hearing is not the I don't, but I want to be fat. Now, you may think that's a bit strange or hokey even, but research has shown that that's how it works. It's an interesting fact that only the negatives are only processed by the conscious mind. And if you pay attention to small children, some of you who have had small children or have them now may have been totally bewildered when you told your child, now be careful, don't spill your milk, and the very next thing they did was spill the milk, and you have this sensation or this feeling that it's like they thought I said spill the milk, for goodness sakes. Well, to some degree they did, because they haven't yet learned to process those negatives. They don't yet know quite what to make of some of those statements. So, I want to be thin, or I want to weigh X number of pounds, is a positive statement of a weight goal. And if you would call it weight control instead of weight loss, you'll keep it framed as a positive. So please, 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 always frame your goals as positive statements instead of negatives, and you'll find that it works much better. And some of you may not think that this is true, but if you will write out your goals and put a date on when you want to achieve them, you will find that they are much more effective than if you just go around carrying them in your head and saying, okay, I'd like to weigh 120 pounds. Well, fine, but there's something about building neuronal pathways in the brain that takes place when you write them as opposed to just saying them. So write them out, put them in your computer, whatever you need to do, and you'll find that they're more effective. Now, step 3, and this is a very, very important step, is that about twice a day you should sit down and review your goals. Now, the best time to do this is in the morning and also in the evening just before you go to bed. And the process is not just to read the goal and say, okay, my goal is this, but it's to actually sit down and visualize, and you notice in parentheses there it says imagine. Have a little daydream for yourself, a controlled daydream. Imagine that the goal is already achieved. Imagine that the goal is already achieved, and imagine how you would feel when that has happened. In other words, put yourself out there after the goal has been achieved, as far as your mind is concerned, and imagine how you would feel. Now, the feeling part is extremely important because it sends a signal to the subconscious mind that says, hey, this person's serious about this, it's important, and I'm going to pay attention to that, because we have all kinds of little momentary fleeting thoughts throughout the day that essentially don't register very much with the subconscious. But when there's a lot of feeling associated with it, that makes an impression on the subconscious. And it's particularly important that you have a feel-good response to having achieved that goal. What would you hear people saying? I can just imagine that if I had achieved some important goal, my friends would be coming up to me saying, hey, that's really neat. That's really good how you did that. Congratulations. As an extreme example, if you were an Olympic athlete and you had just won a gold medal, and you're standing up there on that platform being presented with that medal, and there in the audience are some of your friends, and back home people are watching on television. And later when you come down off the platform, they start applauding and congratulating you and giving you hugs and all that sort of thing. How would that feel? Now, some of you may find that you have trouble getting into that feeling. And one of the ways, and because there's a sense in which it's still abstract, it's not true yet. You haven't really done it, so you may have difficulty getting a feeling from the imagination. Well, if that's the case, go back in your mind to some event that was positive, that you did actually achieve, and that you had a really good feeling with. And what you'll find is that you can reclaim that positive feeling in the moment and go back then and imagine your new goal as being achieved, and you can carry the feeling forward with you. Now, this gets easier with practice, and it turns out that people find that it takes about 3 weeks for this to become really ingrained in their minds. But let me tell you the power of imagination. Some of you may remember Shakti Gawain wrote a book called Creative Visualization way back about 30 years ago, and it was one of the first books that was real popular in my lifetime. At least there were some things that came before me, but a couple of examples. I'll use one of my own first. I started out in high school getting interested in electronics, and I became a ham radio operator when I was about 14 years old. And so I'm talking to people all over the world on the radio, and I was building most of my own equipment. And I eventually developed a dream. I wanted to design my own really first-class communications receiver. That was my dream. I really wanted to do that myself. I couldn't afford to buy really expensive equipment back then, and so I had this dream that one day that's what I wanted to do. And so when I became a senior in high school and was approaching graduation, some friends of mine said, "You going to college?" And I said, "I can't afford to go to college." Well, you can get loans to go to college. And I said, "Well, okay, but what would I do? I want to design radios." And they said, "You study electrical engineering." So I went over to NC State University with a couple of friends and interviewed and applied for financial aid and got accepted at State and designed radios for 15 years. And the very last product that I designed was that receiver that I had dreamed about for all those years. So this was about 25 years in coming, but it did happen. There are many people who have had the experience of dreaming about something for a very long time and making it happen. For those of you that have possibly not read him, Napoleon Hill wrote a book called Think and Grow Rich, which was the outcome of 25 years of research. And that research was initiated by Andrew Carnegie saying to him, "Why don't you study successful people and see what it is that's in common?" And he did. So he spent 25 years studying these people. And he tells in the book about a minister who was very disturbed about the quality of education. And he didn't think that the schools were being run very well, and particularly he didn't think that there was good vocational training for people that weren't college bound. And so for a couple of years, he dreamed about starting his own school. He really wanted to start his own school because he was convinced that he could do it better than anyone else. But he had no money, and he didn't know how to go about it. And one day it came to him that he'd been dreaming about it long enough, and he had to do something to make it happen. And so he got in the pulpit on Sunday, and in part of his sermon, he shared with his congregation this dream that he had had about starting his own school. And when the sermon was over and the congregation was let go, a man from the congregation came up to him. I don't know whether he knew this fellow previously or not, but this fellow comes up to him and he said, "I was very impressed with what you had to say about that school. And if you're serious about it, come by my office tomorrow and I'll give you the $1 million that you need to start the school." And he did. So Here's a person who dreamed about something for a long period of time and eventually saw it come true. People like Oprah Winfrey, people like Bill Gates, Richard Branson, all these people have been dreamers. And of course, Martin Luther King's famous speech, "I Have a Dream," is one that all of us are aware of. And as I heard someone say recently, he didn't give the speech, "I have a plan." He said, "I have a dream." And he wanted to see this come about. So it's very, very important that you do this imagination thing at least once a day and preferably twice a day, and only do it for about 15 minutes and just make it as vivid and as realistic as you can. By the way, there's a very important thing here, which is that the mind can't tell the difference between reality and imagination. Now, if you don't think that's true, just think about some of the dreams you have. They can be good dreams, they can be bad dreams. But there are times when you wake up and you have to convince yourself that it was a dream. It seems so real to you. And so the mind created that dream and then got all caught up in the emotion. I know people tell me that they wake up screaming sometimes because they were having a nightmare and it scared the daylights out of them, and they were sweating and they were shaking when they woke up because it seemed so real. Now, creative imagination is a skill that you actually need to develop for everything you do. For example, in project management, you need to be able to visualize a successful outcome to your project. And so start imagining the end. Let me tell you a story about that, and it's a true story, about a fellow named Larry Wilson, who, when he was 23 years old, sold $1 million worth of life insurance in 1 year. And if you know anything about life insurance, selling $1 million worth of life insurance in a year used to be a really difficult thing, 20, 30 years ago. And so he was asked by the Insurance Association if he would come to their convention that year and speak and tell people how in the world he had managed to sell $1 million worth of life insurance, particularly based on the fact that he was only 23 years old. And he said, "Well, how many people are going to be there?" And they said, "Oh, a few hundred." And he said, okay, he'd do it. And after he walked away from talking to this person, he started thinking, "Oh my goodness, why did I say that? I've never done anything like this." And there are people that would rather die than public speak. And so he was sort of thinking that way, that he'd rather die than get up there on stage in front of all those people, because he didn't know what he was going to say. And something inside him said, "Quit doing that. Quit doing that. You're imagining failure. You're scaring yourself half to death. How are you going to give a good speech if you do that?" And so he turned it around and he said that he started daily imagining giving that speech and having everyone applaud and come up to him afterwards and say that was really great, that was an inspiration to all of us. And so he said when it finally came time to get on the stage and give that speech, it happened almost exactly like he had imagined it. It was like deja vu. And it made such an impression on him and other people that had seen it happen that he founded the Wilson Learning School, where he taught salespeople to visualize success, visualize making sales, visualize getting positive responses from customers. So there's one thing about it, whether you believe it's true or not, it can't hurt to try, because all it's going to take is a little bit of your time. And it has broad application. Olympic athletes are taught to visualize success. Almost all sports players do this. Musicians do it. And the fascinating thing is that they found that the improvement in musical performance is almost as good through mental rehearsal as it is through the real thing. Because again, the mind can't tell the difference between the imagination and the real activity. And so give it a try and see what happens if you're not used to it. Okay, step number 4. What is one step or first step that you can take to move you towards your goal? And that doesn't mean that you should sit down and write out an elaborate plan, because in the first place you really shouldn't worry too much about the how. until your mind has accepted the goal in the first place. But the Quakers do have a saying, pray and move your feet. And it's sort of like the minister who had spent 2 years just visualizing, but he hadn't taken a step to moving toward that goal. And finally he did. He just got up and told the congregation about it. So it might be as simple as that, or it might be as simple as just sitting down and doing something that Jack Canfield talked about. He had become successful years ago, and he'd made $100,000 that year when previously he'd only been making about $9,000 a year. And his wife said, well, goodness, if it worked for $100,000, do you think it would work for $1 million? And he said, I don't know. We might as well try it. And so he actually wrote out a check to himself for $1 million and taped it to the ceiling over his bed so that when he woke up in the morning and looked up at the ceiling, the first thing he saw was that $1 million check. And that reminded him every day that that was his goal. So that was a simple little step, but it was one example of that first step that you might take to move you forward. And again, as this slide says, don't worry so much about how, because your subconscious will do it for you if you just let it simmer. By the way, this is a process that a lot of folks feel very uncomfortable with because they don't yet know how to trust the process. And so you may find that you're that same way, but just give it a shot and see what happens. All right. This is another very important step. Actually, all these steps are important, but this one is right up there with the top. What are you willing to give in order to achieve your goal? Now, that doesn't necessarily mean cold hard cash. Certainly, if you can make financial contributions to charitable causes, or Kiva, which is one of these loan, micro loan things for people in third world countries to start businesses. If you can make small financial contributions to help people, that's fine. But you notice over on the top left illustration, random acts of kindness, expressing love for someone, helping somebody else learn these principles, helping someone else become successful, teaching someone how to do something, helping people be self-sufficient. So you need to give something in order to receive. That's what this bottom line says. You get what you give, not necessarily in direct kind, but you must be giving something of yourself, giving something of your time, and so on. One of the things that you can do is you can teach people from other countries how to speak English, English as a second language. So those are the kinds of things that we're talking about. And if you take this seriously and you do it without expecting a return, and because then it becomes just a bargain, so to speak, you'll find that the giving part does make a difference. Okay, so those are the 5 principles. And I did a little diagram here to illustrate that success is a function of 3 things: innovation, persistence, and project management. Now, we haven't talked about innovation. We haven't talked about creativity. But if you'll think about it, virtually every person that you know of who was successful has done something innovative or creative that accounted for their success. For example, Henry Ford, he didn't really do a whole lot as far as inventing the automobile is concerned. What he did do was come up with the assembly line, and he actually got that idea by having observed how they processed animals in the meat processing plants. But he did come up with the idea of attaching a motor to a carriage, and that was an innovative thing. Bill Gates decided he didn't want to build computers. He wanted to build make the software for them. That was innovative. J.K. Rowling and the Harry Potter series was innovative. She was in poverty almost, and came up with this series and is one of the richest women in the world. Richard Branson sold newspapers when he was young, started Virgin Records, and then one day somebody said something about starting an airline, and he said, let's do it. And of course, you'd think that's insane to try to start an airline in today's world, but he did it. So one of the things I want to impress on you is that if you want to be truly successful, you have to do something that is different than what everybody else is doing. Now you say, well, he started an airline. I mean, other airlines existed. Yeah, but he has a unique spin on it. For one thing, he treats his airline as though it's an entertainment vehicle instead of just a transportation business. Some of you may know Buckminster Fuller, who created the geodesic dome. And I know he went bankrupt once and possibly twice. And at the end of the second bankruptcy, if it was twice, he was terribly depressed and he was just ready to give up. And you know, he sat and he thought about it and he thought about it, you know, what is going on? How can I do this twice and how can I recover from it? And he said that it came to him that if he could do something that nobody else was doing, that the universe would reward him for it. And so he spent the rest of his life trying to do things that nobody else was doing, at least not in the same way that he was doing them. And he was successful from that point forward. So I think innovation and creativity is a very important thing for all of us to know how to do. And I also know that there are some people out there who think they're not creative, and the research on creativity says that the only difference between people that think they're creative and those that don't think they're creative is that the people that are creative think they are. I'm serious about that. They think they are. And in the past 10 years, while I've been teaching the Herman brain dominance model, I found that very left-brain analytical people who think they're not very creative are creative, but they're creative in left brain ways, if that makes any sense. So you will find that if you practice coming up with new ideas, you can do so. Now, persistence, we talked about earlier. You know, when things start going badly, you need to just hang in there and keep trying. But I will say one thing about persistence. There's a saying in psychology that if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always gotten. And the corollary to it is that keeping on doing what you've always done and hoping for a different result is insanity. And so the old thing about if at first you don't succeed, try again should be amended to say, if you've tried several times and it hasn't worked, try something different. Be persistent in pursuing the goal, but try different methods. Don't quit. Don't give up. Now, I put project management over here on the right-hand side because ultimately, when you try to achieve a goal, you have to do some sort of planning, controlling, etc. So project management, and I like to think about one-page project management to keep people from thinking it has to be some elaborate system. Project management is a skill set that we all need because we do need to manage these goal-setting projects that we have in order to be successful. So if you put these three things together, then they will help you ultimately to be more successful. All right. The last step in the success thing is to celebrate, because you need to give yourself a pat on the back. You need to acknowledge that you have achieved a goal. And I'm serious because this is a psychological thing. And I'm not a real good celebrator, but I do believe in the value of doing it. So that's the last step in the process. All right. Now, I need to say that these 5 principles alone are not all you need to know to be successful, because one of the things that will keep this from working is if you have limiting beliefs. For example, some of you may have grown up in families that weren't very well off. Mine certainly wasn't. And I can still remember my father saying from time to time he didn't think he'd ever get ahead. And of course, as long as you believe you'll never get ahead, you generally don't. And so one of the things that some of you will find is that you need to find ways to get over your limiting beliefs. And there's a fellow named Morty Lefko. If you Google him, you'll find a link to his website, who has a system for helping people change limiting beliefs that seems to work pretty well. So I'll just tell you about him. I forgot to put him on this slide. But I do have a number of resources for you that will help you with your journey. And of course, this is on the last slide, or next to last slide in your packet. One of the websites that I found just recently is called Addicted to Success. And I love that website because they have all these lists of 10 things you can do to be more successful, 5 things you shouldn't do, da-da-da-da-da. They have case examples like Richard Branson and his take on success, and athletes who have been very successful and how they did it. And of course, Steve Jobs, the consummate innovator, and how he became successful. So you may want to take a look at that website. Now, I'm starting a new website that is not up yet, but it's called www.besuccessful-u.com. And I want to tell you something that I just found. I Googled the word success, and I found that there were a bunch of keyword searches that people do for success. And so you'll notice the third bullet point here: how can I be successful.blogspot.com. The phrase "how can I be successful" was searched for last month 2,740,000 times worldwide. 2,740,000 times worldwide, and about 2 million times in the U.S. alone. Clearly, there are an awful lot of people out there who want to be successful, who don't know how. And to my surprise, nobody had taken the expression, "how can I be successful?" for a blog. And so I wrote my first blog post today, which kind of summarizes the 5 things that I've just shared with you. And if you go to that, just go to http://howcanibesuccessful.blogspot.com, you'll find that post. The 4th bullet, Jack Canfield is the guy that co-authored the Chicken Soup for the Soul series, and he has a wonderful book called The Success Principles. It's about 2 inches thick, and it goes far, far, far beyond what I've shared with you today. It does contain the same 5 principles that I've shared with you, but it also shares with you techniques for getting rid of limiting beliefs. It has techniques in there on forming mastermind groups. It has techniques in there for practicing acting as if something is true. And let me just tell you one of the techniques that is just fantastic, and I'd urge you to try it sometime. In fact, I do this in my creative thinking classes and another class on how to be a highly effective project manager. Hold a come as you will be in 5 years party. A come as you will be in 5 years party. Jack said that he went to one of these out in California a number of years ago, and the people came dressed up like they thought they would like to be 5 years in the future, and they had made business cards telling what they would be at that point in time, and they passed them out, and they told people about the last 5 years and how successful they'd been and so forth. And he said 5 years later, when they followed up with the people that had been at that party, nearly all of them had achieved what they had set out to achieve. Again, you're planting in your subconscious the image of the goal already achieved, and I can't emphasize how important that is. So I strongly urge you to read Jack Canfield's book. It's a great resource, and you'll find some real good help in there. I'm doing a couple of things. These last 2 things, I've got some people doing app development for me, And the first one is called the PowerThink app, and it is now available in the Google Play Store for the Android platform and the Apple App Store for iPhones. And it's a creative thinking app that I've found to be really helpful in generating ideas to solve problems, to deal with some of those obstacles that we run into occasionally. And then the last app down there is called the Total Success app, and it's not yet released. We're working on the finishing touches to it and hope to have it out early February. And it will only be available in the Android first, and then it'll be available in the Apple platform. But one of the things that I told you need to do is you need to sit down at least once a day and possibly twice a day and review your goals. And so this app will run on your smartphone or your tablets, and you can set the alarm so that it will remind you twice a day to review your goals. And you can do voice recordings of suggestions to yourself about the goals, and you can list a few tasks to accomplish and so on. And if you get a chance to take a look at those, hopefully they'll be useful to you. All right, one last thing, and this is a gift to all of you. Starting on Thursday, March the 7th, I'm offering a 12-week, 1 hour each Thursday webinar. It goes from 7 to 8 p.m. And I call it the Total Success Program. So it's going to go way beyond what I've done here in this one little webinar. All those sessions will be recorded so you can review them if you miss one. You will have action assignments to hone your skills and help you achieve your goals. But best of all, there's no cost and no obligation for this. It's totally free. And you see the link to register here. It will be run with GoToMeeting or GoToWebinar. And like I say, it will take place over a 12-week period. Starts on March the 7th, and I believe it ends on May the 23rd, 7 to 8 p.m. Each week. And the nice thing about doing it online like this is that you have a week in between to practice whatever I teach in a session. Now, this is equivalent to a 2-day seminar if you came to a live seminar at NC State or somewhere else. So it's actually equivalent to a 2 full-day seminar spread out over 12 weeks. And there will be interaction and pods assigned and things like that. So register for that, and feel free to tell your friends about it. It's a no obligation thing. My objective right now is to help as many people learn these success techniques as possible, because we have way too much grief in the world, and it'd be nice if we could help people be more successful. So thank you very much for being here with me today. I know it's Friday, and you're probably looking forward to getting out of work and getting into the weekend. So thanks for spending your lunch hour with me, and sorry about the initial glitch, but thank goodness we got it recovered. And I look forward to seeing you again in a future webinar. And if you have any questions, send them to me at LewisInstitute.Inc@yahoo.com. That's on the invitation that you got, and I'll be glad to try to answer those for you. I find it's easier to do those by email than it is to try to do them live, because I'll wind up crashing the system and then everybody will be sitting out there hanging on. So thank you very much. Have a great weekend. Happy New Year for those of you I haven't said it to, and take care of yourselves.